we have a very distinguished panel. I'll let everybody introduce themselves. I know everybody. Well, why don't you start? Actually, that's Anirban Bandyapati. So let me toss out a question. And I guess it'll also be a topic that'll come up tonight and touch on what I was just saying. Do you think consciousness can guide evolution, or does evolution produce consciousness? Well, does anybody want to answer that?
I'm nervous.
Introduce yourself.
So, my name is Anirban, and I'm working in NIMS, Tsukuba, Japan. And I think that, to me, consciousness is a property by which a living system tries to increase the ratio of its own bandwidth, the frequencies where it operates, to its knowledge. So there is a ever-increasing, so that means if I am a human, I know about the frequency bands, felt it up to certain distance in the universe. So I try to change myself, my internal structures, so that I can feel much slower bandwidth. So it's a, so this particular drive to increase the ratio of my bandwidth with the universe's bandwidth that I know is the driving force behind evolution. If you don't understand, I can't make anything better, because this is what I understand.
My name is Saurav Ghosh. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. I was originally not part of it. I actually came here to listen, not to speak. I really am looking for a definition of consciousness. As Dr. Kak used this term in his talk, and that would be a description of me. I'm actually one of those hard scientists, uses experimental models like mouse models. I'm at Yale Department of Neurology. Now, to me, I am still confused about the definition. So to me, consciousness sounds like a sound which I cannot grab. I can grab the drummer. I'm again, of course, using Eastern analogies. I can grab the drummer, I can grab the drum, but I can't grab the sound. So I'm still looking for it. The usual way I do it is look from an evolutionary perspective. That's because of my training. If that is the case, then evolution at some point must provide an adaptive benefit, some sort of an adaptive advantage to the species where it evolved. That would be the typical reductionist way of going about things. I don't know where it evolved, but there is a different way of looking at it, where it's beyond our description of evolution. It is what that is shaping evolution. It's our way of, it's our limited understanding of consciousness that gives us the perspective of biology. So I don't know whether it helps, but that's my perspective. Thank you so much.
I'm Jim Burrell, and when I think of consciousness and evolution, what comes to mind is that to understand consciousness and what it is, that's one of the issues. And from my own experience, consciousness can have content, but also consciousness can be experienced like a space. It could be a small space or a very large infinite space, almost like a container of content. And the content would be human experience. So it's hard for me I'd have to understand what aspect we're talking about when we're talking about consciousness and evolution. So my sense of it is that evolution itself is given to us by consciousness, and that I cannot put this on a linear framework of one leading to the other. I do have a sense of, I think that we can have conscious evolution. I think that any given individual can evolve their consciousness. So in that sense, I would say that conscious evolution is a very real experience. But I think the definition is where I feel somewhat uncertain about, and the clarification of that would be really important.
Hi, Chris Fields. I suppose I would call myself an information scientist most of the time. I don't think any of the various attempts to explain consciousness as a feature of the universe have had any success or are likely to have any success. And I'm myself driven, as I think many people here are and many people elsewhere are, to the idea that whatever consciousness is, it's a fundamental that just has to be assumed. So I tend to think of consciousness in basically the way that I think of energy as just something we have to assume. And no one has the foggiest idea what energy is. And I don't think anyone has the foggiest idea what consciousness is. Those are just kind of undefined terms that we use to talk about things that we don't understand. So if consciousness is fundamental, it's certainly not produced by evolution. Stuart's question is, does it produce evolution or does it guide evolution in some way? I think that it's probably problematic to try to separate biological evolution per se from the evolution of the universe in general. In other words, non-biological evolution, if you want to call it that, or cosmology, however you want to think of it. I think those two are strongly coupled. We tend to think of biological evolution in terms of nucleic acids like DNA. That's certainly the modern synthesis, is to think of evolution primarily in terms of changes in DNA. But it's been known for a very long time that there are intergenerational processes that don't involve DNA. And if you look at the structure of biological cells, then an enormous amount of information in the cell is not stored in the nucleic acids. It's stored elsewhere in the architecture of the cell. And we get all of that information from mom, not really much of it from dad. But all of that information that's stored in the architecture of the cell actually comes from the architecture of the mother cell. And if you're built, as we are, out of eukaryotic cells, then lots of that cellular architecture is built out of microtubules as well as other proteins. So to the extent that consciousness is something analogous to energy, is part of the organization of that stuff. If consciousness is essentially structured information, then of course it influences evolution, because evolution is just change in the structure of whatever is structured. So I think that would be my answer, that if consciousness is fundamental, it's involved in the evolution of the universe in much the same way that energy is. In fact, I suspect that consciousness and energy are possibly even synonyms.
Same question. I'm Subhash Kak. I'm a hardcore scientist like Saurabh.
Do you
But
prefer a different question?
no.
Okay.
I have some interesting stuff to say on this. But what I'm going to do is, rather than provide a scientific perspective, which we've already heard from many people, I'm going to talk about how this question has been a part of the discussion or the conversation in India for a long time. You know, Sri Yantra, for example, right? Sri Yantra is this diagram of 43 triangles, which is supposed to represent the cosmos, both in the outer representation or outer manifestation of it, and the inner cosmos of the body. So it's entirely the physical structure of the cosmos. And it's supposed to evolve by itself according to laws, right? So then the question comes up, which is the question that Stuart asked, what role does consciousness have to play in it? Consciousness is shown as an infinitesimal bindu, dot, within the yantra. And this dot is Shiva. Shiva represents the principle of freedom or consciousness, right? But the more you look for it, the more it will disappear. It'll be elusive. So in other words, the Indian answer to this question, the question that Stuart asked was that the more you try to look for consciousness through experimentation, the more it will disappear. You shall not find it. It doesn't exist there. But now, then there is a follow-up question. Well, as Chris said, consciousness influences, it's not to be found. You cannot put your fingers on it. But it does influence evolution. So how does it do so? And this is a question also which was asked by philosophers. And they came up with the following answer. They said the evolution is influenced by consciousness through what is called drishti srishti vad. Drishti means look, right, to see. Srishti means creation. In other words, Shiva, or the principle of consciousness, if that's what we want to call it, or freedom, influences evolution of nature by looking. And as you look, you influence. As we see, of course, in popular conversation, Freud speaking of, if you recognize a problem, then you master it, right? Or in quantum mechanics, you have the so-called quantum Zeno effect by my friend Dr. George Sudarshan in the 1970s, which shows that if the experimenter looks at the experiment which is evolving, a physical system which is evolving, then the evolution of the system would freeze. And likewise, just by observing the experimenter without changing the physical evolution of the system, so that he's not suspending the physical laws, but by changing the probability amplitudes where no energy is expended, the evolution of the universe can be changed. So in this sense, in once again a very interesting convergence between very ancient ideas and modern science seems to at least give us some room to answer this very difficult and tantalizing question of Stuart's.
Let's go to our colleagues in India. Would you like to respond, please?
Yes, I would like to respond. From our perspective, consciousness is fundamental to the universe. And recently, David Chalmers, talking about the hard problem of consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, said that probably it is a hard problem because it is an intrinsic property of the universe. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is, you are finding it difficult to understand that if consciousness leads to life, then how do we account for the evolution which we see in fossils? I would just like to respond that our approach is that consciousness is like an abstract universe which Roger Penrose has described as an abstract consisting of mathematical formulas, beauty of mathematics, etc. Now this consciousness, it manifests in the physical world in the form of information. And the same consciousness manifests in the mental world or cognitive world as cognition. And in its real domain of what we call pure spiritual region, it exists in the form of Sat Chit Anand Prakash. But basically, this is exactly what Sir Roger Penrose has said. He said, I find that the physical world cannot be explained unless we accept that it is part of a bigger mental world. And that mental world can also not be explained unless we consider that it is part of an abstract mathematical world. Now, here is the point that I'm making, and that is that the information content in the evolutionary process has increased, and that is how the evolution of species has taken place, and that is how abiogenesis has taken place. This increase in the information content is a direct contribution of consciousness which manifests only in the form of information in the physical world. It is able to combine the physical particles together into a whole and produce an organism. Now that is our concept of consciousness. One other point that I would like to make is that consciousness definitely preceded life. And as you have come across, whether it is the OR theory or whether it is any other kind of theory, it is extremely difficult to explain unless you accept the fact that consciousness is intrinsic to the universe. That is our concept of the consciousness. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tusa. As per my understanding, consciousness is awareness. It is awareness of our environment, of our surroundings, and of ourself. And on a higher plane, it is consciousness of consciousness or realization of the spirit or God. So consciousness basically it operates at 3 levels. At the lowest level, it is the awareness of body or the senses, or we become aware of the truth that is concrete truth with which we can feel, which we can touch. Then at the second level, at the middle level, it is consciousness of the mind. We become aware of our sensations, of our feelings, intelligence. And then at the highest level, it is consciousness of the spirit. Spirit which is responsible for all our actions. If the spirit is not there, then, nothing is there in this world. All the scientific developments, all the scientific inventions which are taking place in this universe, in this world, it is only because of the spirit. So at the highest level, it is consciousness of the spirit, which in Eastern philosophy is the highest level of consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you. Would revered Professor Satsangi like to comment?
I think you need to recognize that all living beings, including human beings, are open systems. And therefore, they receive and give inputs and outputs to this environment in which they live. That is the first recognition which has to come in order to answer the question of the evolution of life or how life came into being. The second question that you have to respond to is that of abstraction. Mathematical abstraction shows you that there are finer particles and you are not taking notice of it. On the other hand, mathematical abstraction on the large side will show you that there are other universes which you are ignoring because you are limited by 10 to the power 10 light years of distance only. So these are the limitations which you have to overcome. And then you will have the answers as clear as you like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am Paavo Pilkkäinen from University of Helsinki, Finland, and University of Skövde, Sweden. And I'd like to connect with Stuart's presentation and this idea, what he was mentioning about the role of consciousness in the Penrose-Hameroff approach. And I've been working with another framework of quantum mechanics, which has been developed by the physicist Bowman Hiley. And it's sort of similar to the Penrose-Hameroff in the sense that both interpretations are trying to give a realistic picture of the quantum world. as opposed to many other interpretations which are, if you like, more subjective, which don't really talk so much about the world. And I think these two different interpretations have both their advantages, disadvantages. The advantage of the Penrose-Hameroff is that they kind of managed to solve the measurement problem in quantum mechanics with the two existing theories, like putting together general relativity and quantum theory, and then you get a collapse. Basil Hiley told me that, you know, Penrose is using the nonlinearity of general relativity to get rid of the linearity of quantum theory, which is thought to be a problem. In the bone theory, you do it in a different way. You assume that there is a particle over and above the quantum field. And then you don't need to assume a collapse in the same way as in the other interpretations. And the advantage of having the particle is that it's kind of close to our common sense, because the particles we find all over the place, including in our brains, presumably. So we don't have to do anything. We are just assuming the particles there from the very beginning. Now, what the wave function does in the bone theory, it can be thought as a pilot wave that guides the particles. And later on, Bohm felt, you know, he realized that you could look at this as a kind of information that's it's not mechanically pushing and pulling the particle, but actually informing it. But Bohm didn't have a very explicit view of consciousness in this approach, and that's what I've been trying to think about. And the best that I can think of is some version of higher order theory of consciousness. So the way consciousness might arise in this approach would be that instead of just having one field guiding the particle, you would have a hierarchy of fields. And certain kind of relationship of those fields would give rise to consciousness. Now that could happen quite early or in the biological evolution, if you like, already before life was there. So, or at least very, almost like simultaneously. And so if consciousness has to do with this kind of high order relationship, and if we think some kind of proto-feelings would be there, then it's kind of conceivable in the Bohm approach that the way evolution is, you know, the way organisms, this kind of primitive organisms are behaving is influenced by these proto-feelings that arise from these quantum mechanical wave functions and the kind of consciousness you have there. So I think there's a way of actually, I was thinking about this today when listening to Stuart, that there might be a way of kind of connecting the two approaches. And we don't know which one is correct. These are just all bold hypotheses, and it's the task of the scientific community to try to shoot them down, if you like, or develop them further. I mean, but I think it's a kind of an interesting idea. And tomorrow I'll be talking about this idea of mental causation in the Bohm approach, where this idea could also perhaps fit in. So I think, but that's enough for now, I think, perhaps a bit too long, right?
My name is Rocco Gennaro. I'm chair of the philosophy department at University of Southern Indiana. I mean, as far as the definitional question that was raised earlier, I think some of what was said earlier makes a lot of sense, that it's consciousness is some kind of awareness. There is, of course, that well-known phrase from Thomas Nagel that I think most philosophers, a lot of psychologists seem to have in mind, that there's something it's like to be in a certain mental state, as opposed to there being nothing it's like to be in that state. I think that's at least what a lot of times people are trying to capture. But of course, the term conscious is notoriously ambiguous and can refer to a lot of different types of things, whether it's to mental states or creatures or whatever else. On the question of evolution and life, I mean, I'm not quite convinced that consciousness is fundamental to the universe, although it may have evolved earlier than a lot of what some people think, even people who might think of themselves as materialists in some way or physicalists in some way. However, in terms of evolution, I mean, consciousness could still guide evolution at a certain point. So, like, for example, now, having organisms that are able to choose where to live, the environments they're in, those sorts of considerations may make a big difference upon how evolution progresses at this point. And I think sometimes that's left out. I don't know if consciousness guided what might be viewed normally as the most earliest stages of evolution, but at a certain point, it can make a big difference in terms of how a species, for example, evolves from there. But in terms of consciousness itself, there's mention of the heart problem earlier. What's interesting, what I find interesting, if nothing else, is when David Chalmers mentioned or described the heart problem, really what he was initially saying, he initially said something like, it's widely agreed that consciousness arises from the brain, but we're just not quite sure how that works. Now that, of course, even just that assumption is questioned, of course, by many here. But that's what he had in mind. Of course, sometimes the heart problem might be thought of as really more like the impossible problem for some, and I'm not sure it's the impossible problem. The only thing I would point out is if you hold a view that's the other way around, consciousness preceded everything, then I'm not sure it's that obvious, at least it's not that obvious to me, how that explains things. That it doesn't explain how consciousness comes to be able to become aware of objects that at least appear to be material or physical. It's almost like what I called last year reverse hard problem that comes up in that context. And it's not just saying that consciousness came first doesn't automatically explain everything. Then you've got a different set of questions that need to be explained instead.
P. Sriramurthy. P. Sriramurthy from Dayalbagh Educational Institute. I'm retired professor of Sanskrit and now belong to the Center of Consciousness Studies. I wish to say that all the spiritual traditions of the world believe that consciousness, the primordial consciousness, is the source of all this universe. Not believe only, they have proved it and explained it also. Those texts and those philosophies which they developed due to their intuitive power, intuitive conceptions, intuitive knowledge, we are not considering at all. And another point I want to say is that evolution has already taken place, physical evolution has taken place. The earth has come into existence from Big Bang, and then biological evolution has taken place. Man is born, is considered to be the cream of the salt of the earth. And then we have some psychological development also. And which we ignore is we have had and we are having spiritual evolution also. That is, spiritual consciousness has dawned on man long, long before. When the Munis, Rishis, and were born, and they revealed so many things, so many sciences also, which we do not know, which we do not accept to know. We have linguistics, we have Ayurveda, where the evolution of life is explained. And so many things are there. And we are, as Professor Kak was making out, we have physical evolution explanations also. We are just ignoring them. And there are no people who can explain them in scientific terms. Now what I wish to say is already the man has evolved, human brain has evolved with the 18 gateways for the highest spiritual power to manifest in this world. It is a manifestation. It is called also theory of progressive revelation. You can say progressive evolution also. And that Param Sants are there. Sants have come, Rishis have come, Buddhas have come, and Munis have come, and prophets have come. They are blessed with higher consciousness. If we say they are less conscious than we are, I think we are failing in our intellectual honesty. And this way, already this evolution has taken place, it is taking place. And if we want to do research, we want to know what is consciousness, we should experiment upon those people in whom consciousness is perfectly manifest. If we do not do that, we will not be able to solve this problem at all for a long time. But scientific approach, as it is explained by Professor Sasangi Sahab, and it is now adopting the first person approach. And also, it is trying to say that the heart problem, that what is called higher thought. And these things, if we take into consideration and consider the ancient texts as well also the practitioners, active and intensive practitioners of these yoga methods, then alone, and take intuition into your methodology, then only, and first person approach, then only we can make progress in consciousness research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Thupten Sampal. I'm the director of the Tibet Policy Institute. It's a research center based in Dharamsala, the seat of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So this interpretation of consciousness is based on the Buddhist interpretation, which we have inherited from India. So for us, human consciousness, or what Buddhism calls the mind stream, has the ability to reincarnate life after life. So this, and where I think science and Buddhism can find common ground, is Buddhism's interpretation and understanding of human psychology. So here, I think ancient India has a lot to contribute to modern science. I believe that how the human mind works, the tools provided by Buddhism to improve the ability of the human mind to go beyond consciousness, is something which India has contributed a great deal. And I believe this is where science and Buddhism can find common ground to understand human consciousness. So I have a talk later, and I'll reserve most of my comments during my delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just two comments. One is I distinguish physicalism from materialism. I think physical could include quantum effects and things that aren't very well defined, whereas materialism is pretty well defined as reductionist and not intrinsic. So I think the distinction is intrinsic or inherent to the universe, or something extrinsic that emerged. And I'm not too worried about defining consciousness. It is very difficult to define. There's a famous story of a conference that decided to define consciousness on the first day and then spend the rest of the week explaining it. And by the end of the week, they hadn't defined it yet. We all know what it is. I think Chris Fields has used the analogy of energy. We know what energy is, but try to define energy. And that's rather difficult to do. Any questions or comments from the audience, or else?
So I have a comment about, the intelligent design. We know that there are a lot of papers published on is this universe a product of intelligent design. But if we see even small things in our day-to-day life, if we want to be successful, if we are implementing something, there is intelligence needed in it. But if we see at the grander scale, like the laws of physics, the universe itself, from the point it started, from where we are now, it looks like it is destined. And evolution is a kind of instrument to move us towards that destination. So for suppose laws of physics, we know the fine-tuning principle of universe. So people call that the universe is fine-tuned such that some of the important constants, if they are off by very minor decimal point, the universe would have expanded unlimitedly or it would have collapsed immediately. So if we think in that process, I know that there are negating factors like multiverse, that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, it is very difficult to comprehend that this kind of design can happen without intelligence behind it. Even small things, to be successful, intelligence is needed. How can this kind of huge universe with such kind of diversity, we humans with consciousness, kind of cognizance, existing, should in itself be a kind of proof that, there is some design, some kind of intent behind the design of this universe, right?
Professor Gennaro had been promoting higher order thought theory, but when he applies infinite regression to it, he fights shy of it and doesn't want to pursue it to its logical abstraction, which would take him to the primary source of consciousness or primary source of thought, which would explain everything. So why is it so? Why do you fight shy of mathematical abstraction and logic and induction principles which point the way to an ultimate primary source of consciousness?
Was that a question? I didn't catch. Huh? Oh, for Gennaro, okay.
I think I understood what you were what you're asking. It's a good question. I mean, I suppose one of the reasons is maybe I'm not convinced that because something can be mathematically modeled, that means automatically that it's something that it reflects something in reality. So,
Isn't mathematics part of the modern science? Do you exclude mathematics from modern science?
well, I mean, modern science can certainly construct various models, but there also can be many mathematical models that are inconsistent with each other, and presumably we don't think they're all true.
Point out the inconsistency. We in our paper have shown that through mathematical abstraction, you can reach the primary source of thought or consciousness or whatever designation you wish to give it. And that explains everything. Nobody has come up yet with pointing out any flaw in that reasoning. Why is that so?
Why? I didn't hear. Why is what?
Why are you fighting shy of the mathematical logic and induction which lead you to the ultimate source, ultimate answers which you are seeking?
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure that the higher order thought theory, leads to that automatically. I can see, that some might think that it might lead to a kind of, regress backwards. But the higher order thought theory really has to do with what makes a state conscious at a given moment.
Precisely that.
Right.
When your infinite regression leads you to the primary source, why don't you pursue that line?
Well, I mean, I might pursue it, but I might think that there is a point, once you get beyond introspection, which would be like a sort of second level up, the way we described earlier, that it's, well, I mean, maybe there are other levels of consciousness that are beyond that, but it's not, maybe there are, for example,
Infinity. What is beyond infinity?
but can we experience infinity? I mean, I suppose someone,
Sure.
yeah, you might say yes.
Sure.
Can you experience infinity without, in a finite period of time? I'm not sure,
Sure can.
Yeah.
Never try.
So,
Never try.
and, the relationship between mathematics and logic, yeah, is very important, obviously, and it can be applied to the model, the higher order thought model, but I'm not sure it forces us to do like a sort of in a temporal, like a regress that goes all the way back to some beginning stage.
I'll make a comment on that. I just read a review of a book by Max Tegmark, The Mathematical Universe, where he essentially tries to say that everything's mathematics. The criticisms of that book include the fact that, I think as Rocco said, not all mathematics are relevant. Not all mathematics describe the universe. And the other is that mathematics, at least according to Penrose, is more of a description of underlying geometry. And there's a structure, the universe has intrinsic structure that we don't really understand yet. That's a geometry that gives rise to mathematics, as it gives rise to the physical constants and consciousness somehow, and the fine-tuning principle that we were talking about earlier, the anthropic principle, and the question of why the universe is perfectly tuned for life and consciousness. And there's basically two answers to that. One is that we just happen to live in the one universe that's perfect, where there are an infinite number of other universes, according to the multiple worlds hypothesis, and we're in the one that can support consciousness. Now that seems, that doesn't seem right to me, that there are all these other universes out there that are useless, and we're in the one. It seems more likely to me that the universe itself evolved to optimize consciousness, and that consciousness is like like the physical constants that are intrinsic to the geometry of the universe that help evolve the universe, and that consciousness is really steering the universe. It's behind the progression and evolution of the universe.
We subscribe fully to this space-time geometry, and we are explaining things through precisely the space-time geometry and the field theory. Quantum field theory, I have said that it's something like Hilbert space, but of a much larger dimension. You are using those principles, but when it tends to infinity, you don't want to grapple with that problem.
I didn't catch all of that, but if you're talking about infinity, that is a problem. Even if you believe, as Penrose does, that the Big Bang was preceded by another eon,
Sure.
and that every Big Bang there's a sequence of Big Bangs,
Yes.
and each time the physical constants mutate and evolve like an organism.
Yes, he's perfectly right. He's perfectly right.
I'm glad we agree on that.
It is because of lack of mathematical preparation and application of logic and induction in the right way that you don't want to pursue that primary source of consciousness or primary source of thought or primary source of life, whatever you call it.
That does raise the question of, you still go, it had to start sometime, or maybe it didn't. It's infinite. It started in the infinite past and it's going to go to the infinite future.
You don't want to approach zero also. That is the whole difficulty. When it comes to finer particles, you are shy of going to zero. And when it comes to bigger and bigger distances, you are shy of approaching infinity. What kind of scientific people does this world have who denounce mathematics and the logical induction that shows the way to reach zero as well as infinity?
I mean, if I may comment, I think we have very
Professor Stuart Hamroff.
Oh,
Professor Stuart Hamroff.
yes.
Professor Barrell, in his lecture today, mentioned objectively observe subjective space as one of the components for integrating the Eastern and Western perspective. Now, this is the problem area which needs a little bit of elaboration. How do you objectively observe a subjective space? The concept and the understanding of infinity can come only from the subjective space. And this subjective space, how can it be investigated in an objective manner? Professor Barrell.
Professor Barrell said that. Go ahead.
The higher states of consciousness, as I mentioned today, the difference between a kind of awareness where we're in the moment and we're experiencing our embodied presence. When we get to higher states of consciousness, And those higher states were no longer localized. That consciousness is no longer a localized consciousness. Objectively, what I mean by this, by noticing our experiences, we can notice what I'm saying right now, is that I have experienced that non-localized state. Many of you may have already experienced this non-localized state. We may go in and out of it every once in a while. But the idea is that you can begin to notice higher states of consciousness. You can relive those states of consciousness. There is no individual observer necessarily, but there's a noticing that can go on, just as there's an awareness that can go on.
One more comment. Professor Anirban Bandyopadhyay also mentions his problem of triplets that arises because he wants to approach zero on one side and infinity on the other. Besides whatever object you have in this world and you call it objective theory. So that object can only be explained by approaching zero on one side and infinity on the other. That is why you have triplets.
Yes, actually I wanted to make this comment also to Stuart's, to response to Stuart, that in quantum, in the history of quantum in 1920s to 1930s, there were situations in every singularity, whenever you encounter a singularity, we do renormalization. By brute force, we jump the singularity point. But if you take one, say, clock inside a clock inside a clock inside a clock inside a clock, if you go continuously in a fractal situation, what is total time? Infinity. So we had historically this kind of situation. And what we did to solve the problem, we did renormalization. And Feynman himself said, it's a hooky-pooky action. Nobody liked it, but we solved it. I think that a time would come in history when we would look back to that problem and get inside the singularity to find out how far can we go. So the point of zero, everywhere from the zero, there is an infinite path. And it is well known. If you see the Feynman diagram, you can find there is a fractal path, path inside a path inside a path inside a path. If you just calculate it, you will reach infinity. Everywhere, everywhere. And you just take out Google search and you put it right now, renormalization, you will find fractal path. They can't solve it. And what do they do? Forcefully jump. Consider as if whatever be the value, it is equal to 1. So just to match the data. So that's why I said nested time cycle, so that you enter inside the singularity, get out, go to certain depth and get some data out. So in case of any fractal system, in space-time geometry, if you have any fractal situation, you always reach infinity, everywhere, every single point you imagine. So matter and wave interaction. I mean, we are talking about great things like consciousness and other things. Simple, a photon and a matter interaction. You can't explain it without imagination, by brute force, considering that there is no singularity. So.
And if you look at the Fibonacci numbers and the Fibonacci curve, which is prevalent all over nature, it combines the zero with infinity. Fibonacci is one thing which can bring the zero and infinity together into a fractal world. That is what fractal world is.
And not only Fibonacci, I mean, if you think of pi, if you think of E, and you can find it. I mean, we were doing one very interesting thing. You can also try. E is an infinite series. Phi, golden ratio, is an infinite series. Take a square of that. E square plus phi square. Take a root over, you will find pi. And we tested it up to 15 digit. Now we are going higher and higher orders. You perfectly derive pi. So the infinity does not mean that it cannot give you a perfect 2.000000000. So the integer that you are seeing could arise from a completely undefined space.
So why don't you try just e square plus phi square equal to pi square? There are lots of students. Take a calculator or write a program, and you check it. Infinite series, which never ever can give you a finite, I mean a perfect integer, but you will get a perfect integer with these relations. So there are ample examples of universal constants where from infinite series you can reach to a absolutely perfect integer. So I give just one example.
One of my questions I have is that how does one experience the infinite? I mean, we're talking about being outside of time. And one of the ways of being outside of time is when we remove the conceptualizations of this world that we live in and get beyond words and beyond language, we enter a whole different kind of time-space. And I'm not even sure, I think one of the important questions about consciousness has to do with our understanding of time. What do we mean by time?
Transcendental meditation and ultra-transcendental meditation are the answers to realize this.
I might comment that how do we experience the infinite is a good question, but the real question is how we experience anything. I mean, what is consciousness, even if it's something like looking at your cell phone or just feeling anything? Consciousness is the problem. And of course, in normal consciousness, then enlightened states and experiencing things like infinities are additional problems. But we haven't gotten past the first problem yet. But regarding singularity, I read an article recently, someone sent to me that they were trying to explain Hawking radiation by saying that the inside of a black hole was actually a quantum superposition, perhaps something like a Bose-Einstein condensate, and that it collapsed, and that gave rise to what came out as a Hawking radiation. And this person who sent me the article said, well, wouldn't you and Penrose therefore have to say that the black hole was conscious since it was having these objective reductions, expecting me to be embarrassed and deny it? And I said, no, it could be, because we've also said that a neutron star with large-scale superpositions could have some kind of consciousness, maybe not cognitive and meaningful, but experiential. So I think consciousness, I don't know if, I guess this is a question to the physicists, would consciousness in a black hole solve the problems of infinity and renormalization?
It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, but it does indicate. You see, the information content inside a black hole is proportional to the area and not the volume of the black hole, which means that the information that is contained inside a black hole is a two-dimensional. But the real world that we see is a three-dimensional world. And that gives us an impression that everything that we see in the real world is a projection. It's a holographic projection. It's a three-dimensional projection of information which is contained on the surface of the black hole, inside the black hole, which is two-dimensional. The entire universe, there is a theory which says, is a closed system. It is a black hole, and the entire information is contained in it, but it is digitalized information which is projected as a hologram and gives the impression of a real universe.
I don't subscribe to this view. Infinite dimensional consciousness is what you should pursue.
So one point I would make in terms of the original question, evolution is a very biological concept, right? It's a concept of biology. I can identify, it's based on genes. I can identify the gene for taste, the gene for pain. I can change this. But consciousness seems to me to go quite beyond this. So I think it's mixing things that don't mix necessarily. I don't know whether we can, I don't certainly believe there is a gene for consciousness that I can knock out tomorrow in an animal model. So perhaps...
We have anesthesia for that.
Right. But so yes, certainly it can be affected by psychotropics, by many different things. I mean, parts of the brain, okay, it's distributed throughout the brain, but you knock out the brainstem, the person is not conscious. We all agree. Now, so I think.
Well, they could have islands of consciousness. That's arousal. That's vegetative patients may not be able to respond, but they may have isolated. That's a debatable point.
That's a debatable point, exactly. So I think perhaps we should also try to define what consciousness is not. This is something that it has been used in ancient India as a scientific approach of what it is not. And I think it's time that we incorporate that way of thinking rather than just simple reductionist approaches.
I just wanted to,
Professor Kak, why don't you comment?
Professor Kak, why don't you comment on this? Professor Subhashkar.
Let me wear my computer scientist hat. The artificial intelligence perspective on all of this is that why worry about internal states? Just look at behavior. Because if you're only looking at behavior, then one can talk with unanimity on what is happening. And therefore, people who are doing AI and their hope is that the world would be teeming with AI machines and humans would not be needed anymore. And that probably may not be that far off, according to some people. You know, we are very close to the singularity. So if that were the case, then from an operational point of view, can we think of situations where we are not different from, if not machines of now, machines of the future? But having said this, let me try to find some common ground. You know, if you look at neuroscience, we are a machine. If you look at physics, we cannot flout the laws of nature, so we must be machine-like, right? And on the other hand, if you look at the Indian approaches to reality, where you start off with consciousness as the ground, right? There also it is acknowledged by people within the tradition that you cannot find any traces of consciousness if you look for it within materiality. So to that extent,
Yes.
Yeah, you cannot look for any.
But why not practice the right meditation technique?
No, I agree. Professor Sasing, I totally agree with you. I'm just looking at it as an outsider, you know, when people are sort of debating. And to that extent, there is this common ground that we'll not be able to find it. So the question would be ultimately the proof within oneself, right? If one can find that, or as I've tried to do for the past many years, are there traces of the workings of the freedom? Because ultimately consciousness is freedom, right? One can say that. Are there traces of the workings of this freedom which cannot be captured by laws, as we know, social, political, economic, physical, biological, which would give us proof of the kind that people may find credible, that indeed this means that there is more to reality than materiality. So there is a lot of common ground that you cannot find it, but on the other hand, there is a possibility that one can establish it, and if you can establish it, then of course that is major.
Let me comment. I briefly touched upon it in my talk, that we can show you, demonstrate you that even such social measures as CSR, that is the corporate service realization or whatever, that index will be higher for those who practice meditation rather than the ones who do not practice meditation.
I think that's a great point. I think that's a point that Professor Barrell also made, that there are correlates. And again, computer scientists are saying that, okay, if we can find out where is the activity inside the brain, you know, you do fMRI or whatever, then possibly you can read people's thoughts, right? And you can do other things. And therefore, you're taking a subjective feeling and finding an objective correlate. And that could be helpful. We don't know where all that might go, and certainly that's where science is going. Yes, absolutely, I agree.
We have to conclude in maybe 2 minutes.
I would like to just reiterate that the correlates, the objective correlates of the subjective, all of this is within consciousness. So I think the question that was asked over here about finding out where consciousness does not exist. And I said, personally, I've been under anesthesia, and I've experienced experiences. I could hear, I had sensations, I had a sense of presence. So
You need a better anesthesiologist then.
And then, yeah. And then sleep research, like deep sleep, stages 3 and 4 sleep. Maybe we have questions about maybe consciousness, what happens to consciousness during deep stage 4 sleep, delta sleep. We know that during dream sleep, there's a consciousness, but as we woke people up during the night, during stages 3 and 4 sleep, we always receive reports of something going on, some kind of thought or fragmented thoughts or images or whatever. So this question about, where does consciousness, where does it not exist? I think it's a good question.
We have to wrap up soon. We have to wrap up. The time is over.
Time is over.
We thank all the panelists for this lively, wonderful discussion and august members of the audience. I now request Dr. Srivastav to please introduce Professor Pilkanen.
On behalf of the conference, we have a small gift for revered Professor Satsangi. Well, these are seeds, hot chili pepper seeds from Arizona. And I know you like chili. And these are very special Native American seeds. And here's a seed head news, and this is a description of the seeds that you can either eat or plant at Dialbag. And hopefully next time I visit, we'll have some food spiced by these Native American seeds.
Good.
And let's see. Right, I remember watching you in the fields, and this is a description of these particular seeds. And there's a grinder. Where's the grinder? So the grinder is a cactus-shaped grinder. I won't open it up. And one more item. This is a plaque that can go for a memory of actually, this is Old Main. This is the main building at the University of Arizona, which looks a lot like the building at Dialbag. Doesn't it? I was confused a little bit there for a second. And it goes in this...
Begin practicing meditation. You look more like us.
Okay. And it's in a bag that says Wildcat for Life. And Wildcat, the University of Arizona Wildcats are our mascots. So it's a great pleasure to...
I'm overwhelmed by your hospitality and your gifts.
Well, you're very welcome, and we thank you. It's a blessing for us, for all of you to come, and we look forward to future collaboration and working together. Okay? Thank you.